problem is not out of the way yet for South African businesses because they're still counting the costs in millions and millions of a week of sporadic violence, massive looting, stores and supermarkets, as well as wanton destruction and arson. This is a developing story even after the unrests have quieted, the rampaging looters and some of the arsonists arrested, or they simply walk away. Joining me for some updates on this from the business community is Chris Hart, the Executive Chairman at Impact Investment Africa. Good evening to you in Joburg, Chris. Good evening.
Good evening.
We're talking about the impact here, and now we're counting the costs. What are the mid to long-term economic consequences of this recent unrest, arson, loot, and general violence for Africa's most advanced economy?
Well, I think in the medium and longer term, there's clearly another dent to South Africa's investability and general ability to attract investment is going to be even more limited. We're already struggling to attract investment. In fact, even before this, we've seen outflows. But there are actually some very positive signs, I think, because this was very political. It was raised basically the ruling party fighting itself, and that came out. They used disaffection, of local populations, local communities where you've had big job losses and the lockdown. It's really created almost a pressure cooker of frustration. That's been released, okay. But what was very clear is that we actually have quite a capable private sector and a very, very incapable government sector. The brunt of the looting was the private sector. It was after shops, it was after businesses. Virtually no government installations were actually targeted or attacked. So that was also interesting because it also was, it was effectively factions of the ruling party fighting with themselves. But that particular fight was interesting because I think what we call the previous regime, the Zuma regime, have actually lost the internal battles within the ANC. And these were them trying to maintain their relevance, if you like, by moving the battle outside the ANC to try and prove that they still have power. And the fact that they haven't been able to sustain these the looting, it's really just, as I say, the pressure cooker of social frustration, of lockdowns and job losses, that once this has happened, there is no real popular support for the actual culprits that have triggered this violence. And that, from a medium to longer term point of view, creates an irony in the sense that it's quite possible to start seeing the ruling party being challenged, not necessarily by a single entity on the national stage, but rather regional fragmentation, what we call enclave society developing, because it was clear that civil society was on their own. And usually when there's, when you have extremists going berserk, they usually have the run of the mill. And here you actually had middle of the road, middle ground civil society actually fighting back.
Yes.
Quite strongly, in fact.
Yeah, Chris.
And that's very positive.
Chris, quick one here, because there are reports that black-owned small enterprises are likely to be the worst hit. That was according to the Black Business Council a few days ago. Is that a reality or a fact that the blacks that are already unemployed, have high unemployment figure, will be the worst hit?
It is blacks. It is the poorest workers that are being hit, whether they are in, and I say in inverted commas, in white businesses or black businesses. I think the businesses that hit the headlines the most were things like ShopRite, Checkers, and Macro, and that type of thing. In other words, your very large chain stores that were hit, but the large number of small businesses, right, was hit. And I think in any of these where you have communities involved, communities tend to feel it hardest in the absence of information of other communities. So you'll find, for instance, the Indian community will say they were hit hardest in KwaZulu-Natal. Their businesses were hit hardest. Black businesses, black-owned businesses in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng were also hit very, very hard. Where the mob raged, there wasn't any discrimination to say you leave that business alone because it's white-owned or black-owned or whatever the case is. They were all hit and smashed to smithereens. The biggest sector that suffers are the small businesses in particular, because they don't really reach the news. And these are people's dreams and aspirations that were just really smashed. And there's no compensation for small businesses in this case. The small businesses got no compensation for the COVID lockdowns.
That's where I was going next, because I was thinking with this massive and wanton destruction and deliberate arson targeting businesses of blacks, white, Indians, Lebanese, whoever, and President Ramaphosa had made an boots on the ground, trying to see the scale of the destruction. Do you think the government will provide the affected businesses with any form of relief in the form of perhaps a tax break, or will ask the banks to give some forbearance to some of these businesses that have got loans or credits to run their businesses, even with this very harsh lockdown for the virus COVID-19?
Well, if we have a look at the measures that were given for small businesses for the lockdown, there was 200 billion rand that the government said were going to be guaranteed loans that small businesses could apply for, as relief for the lockdown. I think it was so hard to access that eventually, I think at this stage of the 200 billion rand, roughly 10% has actually been accessed. The government was not there to help protect any of these businesses when the looting started. And in fact, there was certainly evidence that some of the police may well have been in cahoots with the looters and the rioters, not generally, but certainly in isolated cases. But certainly civil society felt the government simply was not there for them to protect them against the businesses, and they're not going to be there to actually get any compensation. What we've seen, though, is civil society stand up, resist the rioters, but also step in, roll up their sleeves and start helping with the cleanup. In other words, they're not waiting for the local authority to come in with a normal cleaning thing. They're actually getting stuck into cleaning their communities and actually getting the restoration right. And this is where you're seeing a very capable and private sector against stark contrast of a very, very inept and incapable government sector.
Okay, so on a final note, we have about a minute or less. Chris, do you think the Ramaphosa's administration, from what you're hearing on radio, on television, and reading the newspapers over the last few days, do you think the administration in Pretoria is beginning to address some of the underlying issues of this unrest, which you call a pressure cooker, a crime and discontent?
No, I think what you're going to see is communities look for solutions within themselves. The problems have actually been created by the government, the Ramaphosa government and the previous government. Unemployment has been a real problem and not being resolved, being caused by policy issues and uninvestable. They're making the place uninvestable, causing these pressure cooker situations to arise. They're not going to be part of the solution. And increasingly, people are seeing that they've got to look inwardly to their own communities for their own solutions.
Chris, it's a very interesting but very heartbreaking situation right now in terms of, so I go back to that particular issue. Do you think anytime soon for the rest of the year things could taper off a little bit, and some of this outlook that we're seeing in terms of economic forecast, in terms of GDP for South Africa, could come out to be a little bit less than hotting than we expect with this violence and looting?
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to subdue the immediate economic output of the country going forward. But I think it is, as people join in the resources, that this country is showing its resilience. And I think there's a lot of hope going forward, especially as I think the government will be disintermediated more and more. And it also is going to be reflected in the actual election results.
Thank you so much, Chris Hart, Executive Chairman, Impact Investment Africa. We thank you for your time today and see you next time.